Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. In this episode, I want to have a look at racism and the gravitational pull towards mediocrity. Now, what do I mean by that? Racism and the gravitational pull towards mediocrity. And in many cases, I would say less than mediocrity. I would say, in many cases, downright incompetence. The gravitational pull to not accept a merit-based system, but a system that inherently looks at your individual identity. Right? Has anybody experienced that? Now, there is a piece of content that's out there. It was produced by Matt Walsh, and Matt Walsh goes into the issue surrounding a Cambridge University professor by the name of Jason Ardea. Now, Jason Ardea essentially becomes a university professor at Cambridge, and Mr. Ardea alleges that he could not read nor write prior to the age of 18. He's not a very old guy, or he was not a very old guy. He took the fast way out and downloaded himself not too long ago, but you know that shit happens, right? But again, the question remains: after he was allegedly plagiarizing quite a bit of his work. Now, we don't know how far back that goes, and I have to wonder, just based on my own experiences, was he helped out significantly on the way? Should he have even been given that professorship at Cambridge? And the answer to that is absolutely no. But even before that, was he given what I call the benefit of the doubt of the noble lie? You guys know what the noble lie is, right? I've discussed this before, that all peoples are created equal. I do not believe that is the case. Now, I'm not going to get too much into that. However, I do want to address the issue of the gravitational pull towards incompetence and mediocrity, the likes of which, we have seen with Mr. Jason Ardea. Now, what have you seen? Listeners, what have you seen in the workplace or in other areas of life where you know that in certain cases the benefit of the doubt was given and said person was given a job that he or she was not qualified for and was given that role based on race? I think you guys know what I'm talking about. This concept of perpetual affirmative action, in which, in many cases, affirmative action is really no longer necessary nor needed, right? But if you were to go into any HR department or any workspace, and let's say hypothetically that the personnel that you manage are for the most part white males, and for whatever reason, good or not good, the HR department and you yourself is pressured into hiring someone, maybe not completely for their skill set, but you have to fill a quota, right? A racial quota. So who has run into the issue where if you have an incompetent employee, and you have decided that, you know what, it would probably benefit, my department if this person was no longer with the business, either your business or a business that you work for. And who has received the pushback from the HR department saying, hey, whoa, hold on a second, you can't, we can't terminate this employee because, and you kind of get that wink and a nod, and you get that, hey, we have to have all our ducks on a row on this person, right? Whereas if this would have been, let's say, a 38-year-old white male who was underperforming, right, and not doing a good job, and you decided as a leader that for the good of the department, good of the business, that it was probably time for you and that employee, the business, and that employee to part ways, right? In all likelihood, if that was a 38-year-old white male, HR department would have been, no problem. No problem. How can I help? That's what you would get, right? Now, I want to tell about an experience that I had many years ago. Let's just call this well over a decade ago. So I'm not going to say the company. It was a fairly large company. If I said the name of the company, most people here in the States would know that company. So I was running a department, and let's just call it a senior manager or a senior person in a leadership position came to me and said, hey, voice of reason, I need you to take on a favor. I need you to take on a person that I know you didn't hire, that has been having some challenges, and I would like you to take him on your team, and I would like you to try and help this individual. All right, let's do it, right? How do you say no to that? Well, you can't. It's difficult to do that. Now, I took this individual onto my team, and I knew right away that we were going to have some challenges. And just to kind of give you an idea, you the listener, the idea is we really had to start at kind of the ground level, and just in terms of how do you compose an email. Not just sending an email, right? Most people can do that. But a professional email, right? How do you do that? What does that look like? Just to give you an idea, that's kind of in the neighborhood of where we had to start with this individual. This individual absolutely was not qualified for the role that he was hired for. And yes, this individual was not a white male. Let's just say that, okay? So it took the better part of a year just to get this individual beyond the point of consistently failing, to even be somewhat salvageable. And again, if this would have been a 38-year-old white male, man, I would wager to say if this would have been a 38-year-old white female, that they would have been removed from the business within a few weeks, maybe a month or two. And in all probability, not in all probability, without a doubt, they would have never been hired. But because this very large DEI-focused business had to hire a certain amount of minorities, they decided to take a chance with this individual. And I firmly believe that he was hired simply based on his race, his skin color. That's why he was hired. Now, fast forward. This is where it really gets interesting. So, not just myself, but I have had a very, very close friend who, at one point, became this individual's manager as well. You got to understand this took place over a period of years, right? This individual was retained by this business for years upon years. And we had some additional challenges with this individual, kind of centered on, I would say, integrity and doing things not the right way. That could have resulted in termination immediately. So again, this happened with another manager where this individual had to also manage this same individual, and I'm not going to talk about the whole dynamics of how that occurred, but anyway, I ended essentially back with the same individual as his manager, and I also had the same challenge in regards to integrity that could have resulted in an immediate termination, right? And in both cases, both myself and another manager, again, the same guy, right? The same individual, could not be fired because of his skin color. What we were informed by HR is that we really needed to obtain a paper trail of documentation. I mean, normally speaking, if it would have been something, again, anyone else would have committed such an infraction centered around integrity and being unscrupulous, would have been fired. But not this individual. Again, based on one reason. And as maybe you have experienced this when you interact with these HR departments, you know, they're not going to come out and outright say that's the reason why, but they'll claim certain protections are provided to this individual. He's a protected class, and everything really needs to be above board in terms of, or not above board, that would be, I would say, an improper definition, but everything really needs to be dress in terms of proceeding down the road of eventual termination with this individual, that you would not have to do if this would have been a 38-year-old white male, and I would also say a 38-year-old white female. So before I continue with my story and kind of what I have experienced, I wanted to circle back and just have a brief discussion on why this sort of activity, meaning race-based discrimination in the workplace, and what I mean by that is hiring incompetence and mediocrity at best to meet a certain racial quota, right? How does this impact businesses, and I would say more importantly, how does this impact the U.S. military and the U.S. government? Well, unfortunately, we are seeing this sort of activity taking place both in the U.S. military and the U.S. government. Now, it has essentially become the norm. And what I mean by that, most human resource professionals right now in the workspace are incredibly hesitant about taking up the banner of removing a certain individual or individuals if that individual has a quote-unquote protective status, it has gotten so bad that there may not even be a policy that says, hey, you have to treat this person differently, but they do. Meaning the HR department. They absolutely do. They will be much more hesitant about removing a problem worker if that individual happens to be black. And if that business has to reach a certain internal element of minority hires, quote unquote minority hires in the workspace. Because we're, in some cases right now, we're reaching numbers where minorities are not minorities in some places. They're the majority in some places, right? So that whole concept has been turned on its head, so to speak. So again, we're looking at a system right now that rewards mediocrity and in some cases incompetence outright. And to police up and get rid of that mediocrity and incompetence, it can be incredibly difficult to do. Incredibly difficult to do. Now, back to my story and what I experienced in this specific situation in terms of onboarding this individual and then eventually going through the trials and tribulations of having to continue to operate my department with this individual and seeing what other persons had gone through as well. So this individual specifically that I'm talking about had been with the business for years. Okay, just getting by. Mediocrity. We went from outright incompetence to just getting by. Just getting by. And at times doing things that could absolutely have gotten him fired, terminated, if he would have been a 38-year-old white male. Now, fast forward to COVID. Fast forward to COVID. Essentially, the entire department in this very large business was let go. Everybody was let go in the department, in this big business. And it affected not just my department, but other areas of the business as well. I took a severance package, as did the manager friend that I had that had also supervised this individual that we are talking about. Okay, so everyone, multiple departments impacted. There were two individuals that were spared either layoffs, severance package. You want to guess who those two individuals were? Yeah. You guessed it. Two quote-unquote minorities. One of those was the mediocre, the Medicare semi-incompetent individual that I was essentially forced to take on to my department. So this very large business, this huge business, laid off, terminated, or gave severance to dozens upon dozens upon dozens of, in some cases, very qualified employees that had been with this business for a very long time. The only individual that survived was that lower performing individual that probably should not have been hired in the first place. He was retained, and he was retained again based on his skin color. Didn't want to let him go. It's amazing. It was an amazing and eye-opening experience that obviously, if you were in one of these roles and you knew kind of what was happening on the ground and you were able to see what occurred in terms of the business retaining that individual, that in all probability, not in all probability, absolutely should have been terminated multiple times years prior, and essentially were not allowed to move on this individual, and it got to the point where we kept him because we knew we had to keep him, and that's the way life existed. It just became the new norm. And this is just a one example, probably among tens and tens and tens and tens of thousands of examples where this is happening. I would say not only here in the United States, but clearly if you were to watch that Matt Walsh content about the black Cambridge professor that in all probability had absolutely not enough qualifications and was not qualified to hold that role, but was given that role based on his skin color, based on his race, based on left-wing diversity, equity, and inclusion. He was put in that position. Was he qualified? No. Was the individual that I had to deal with qualified? No, absolutely not. To get into that role? No. But he was given that role based on skin color, and because myself and other persons within the management team essentially were not allowed to act by human resources, that individual eventually outlived me in that specific large business. And we see this happening all over the private sector, and then obviously government as well. You see individuals, so when you go to the Department of Motor Vehicles or any sort of governmental service organization, and you ask yourself, why are we seeing these organizations decreasing in quality and performance? It's because of this, or this is a component to what we're seeing. Because again, even in government, you hire an individual that may not be qualified for a certain role, but that individual is hired ultimately because he fits a certain skin color, even if he's incompetent, right? So he's hired on. More likely than not, he's carried and supported and given the benefit of the doubt, right? He's given the benefit of the doubt, quite possibly for a number of years, and then ends up in a leadership position, being grossly unqualified, is given the benefit of the doubt, is helped and handheld through his career, and is continued to be pushed up the ranks of whatever organization he belongs in or exists in. And it's absolutely wrong. And it is having an impact both on businesses and, hypothetically, if it's a service sector governmental type role, it's having an impact. It absolutely is. Now, what would happen if we didn't fill these quotas? What would that look like? Well, yes, it would look exactly like you think it would look. It would have the appearance of inequality. It would have the appearance, but ultimately, it's an appearance. Ultimately, certain individuals are not qualified for certain roles, and they should not be given those roles. And yet, they are. And again, this is having an impact. It absolutely is. And I think now, obviously, with the ability of the internet to reach out to millions, and I would also say people such as myself that have reached a point of just being utterly fed up of what I have experienced, and let's just call it what we have experienced, and are now willing to speak up and saying, hey, this is what is happening. This is happening. We can go back to a very small percentage of the population of the United States. It gets thrown out there, 13% of the population commits about 60% of all violent crime and murders in the United States. That's a factual number, and in reality, it's probably more like 7%, because that 7% is mostly the male population of that demographic that is committing those crimes, and that should blow your mind. You should do a double take on that. Imagine if you snapped your fingers and you removed 7% of a certain demographic, and your crime rate, your violent crime rate, would decrease by 60%. Would that be something realistically you would be adverse to looking at? Like, if you could just snap your fingers and 7% of the population disappeared, but it decreased your violent crime rate by 60%. Maybe, maybe not. I'm just asking the question, right? I'm just asking the question. But again, back to the private sector, back to government employment, back to this gravitational pull towards mediocrity, back towards incompetence. Are you seeing it? Do you deal with it day to day? Now look, there obviously are some very competent, quote unquote, minorities that have been placed into positions that do very well, right? But there are a very, very significant number that were placed in these positions that have been given the benefit of the doubt and should not be in those positions. And you, again, the noble lie and the concept of the benefit of the doubt, you know what I'm talking about. You've been in that circle of conversation where you have one member who's being the benefit of the doubt group that has a difficult time with certain elements of the English language, right? It's amazing to me that one group has this inherent challenge of pronouncing the T in that, as opposed to saying that you perpetually hear dat. There is no D in that. It's T-H-A-T, and it's pronounced that. That, not dat. That. That's the benefit of the doubt. If I were to go into a group of executives or management personnel, and I were to say, as a white Anglo-Saxon male, if I were to say, dat be, they would look at me like I was insane and have maybe lost my mind and a lot of education. But you flip it and you put that group into that circle, perfectly okay. That is the benefit of the doubt I'm talking about. Just that simple type of instance. And obviously it gets much, much deeper than that. As always, thanks for joining us. Have a good day.